All they want to do is talk Kates. Crosstalk. All they want to do is talk Kates.
You are now listening to Crosstalk,
Crosstalk.
our special crossover
wanna
coverage
do is
show.
talk
Beep, 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 beep. Ladies and gentlemen, this just in, crossover's out, and it rocks.
Oh yeah, the only podcast covering every issue of Crossover by Donny Cates.
I don't know if we can explicitly promise that.
Okay, unless Donny,
All right.
unless Donald himself starts a comic book podcast about his own comic, which is not beneath him, I think we own this.
Oh, tell the listeners the nickname you came up for Donny Cates today.
Donahasi Cates.
I thought that was so funny.
Did you? Because
I did a big old giggle to myself. I don't know if I texted you an LOL or not, but you got me laughing out loud.
Oh, you're okay. So you paid me a compliment. I'm going to pay you one.
Okay.
You were doing a little bit where you're going to go to C2E2 and you were going to cosplay as a Substack business guy and hand out $400,000 checks to people, which is literally the best cosplay idea I've ever fucking heard of.
I might print fake checks and just be like, "You ever write anything?" And just like hand strangers money,
Oh, I love
fake
it.
money.
I love it.
Yeah. I think creators would get a kick out of it too.
Oh, they totally would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told you if I'd start a deal with someone who was an artist and then be like, "Oh wait, you're not a writer," and then just crumple up their check and throw it away. Be like, "Never mind, you're not worth my
No,
time."
get out of here.
Huge statement coming through. This is my favorite issue
Oh,
of crossover.
You had a
yet.
real statement. Okay.
Yeah.
This is your favorite issue?
Yeah.
This was a fabulous issue.
So good.
Really, really good. Although I did really like last month's, I guess.
Yeah.
But this new arc is great. I think the arc is called Meanwhile.
Yep.
And there's a lot to talk about here. And for once, the highlight, in some ways, is not the cameos.
Yes.
Not to take away from how good this comic book is.
The comic has officially reached a point where it's transcended the cameos and Easter eggs and things.
Yes. We could talk about them briefly because I think we always kind of have a part where we do talk about them.
Mhm.
There's a jail scene, if you remember where we last left you. Meanwhile, the main characters have been arrested
Yep.
by the Powers duo. And inside the jail scene, there's a savage dragon.
Yep. Getting arrested.
Looks to be a little bit like a Wolverine kind of reference. I don't know if you saw that.
Didn't catch that. There was someone who kind of looked like Big Barda to me.
Oh, is like Angel? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But no big things. But we'll get to one that's the obvious thing.
At the end of the story.
Yeah,
Right?
which I will say I read a couple of articles on this book. Nobody mentions this like end thing, and I really want to talk out the end of this book
Sure.
with you because I have a lot of thoughts on it or
Yeah.
questions, I guess. So in general, this series is going into like crime, whodunit, who is killing authors of comic books,
And maybe
why.
I'm just like digging it right now because that's a genre that I'm interested in, and a smaller story is making that maybe a little more fun and a little easier to like gel all in my head.
right.
Like the relationships between the characters are making more sense. There's less like throwaway characters. Like it was definitely fun to see that like Payback's gang and Madman and stuff like that in there, but the constant like addition of new characters made like relationships between the reader and the main characters a little harder to gel, and those are definitely like relationships I'm understanding better and complexities and depth in the story that I'm like more excited about now.
Right. There were like 3 references to things
Uh-huh.
that are comic book related
Yeah.
in here that I felt like were the most massage delivered that we've gotten in crossover.
Like kind of under the radar, you mean?
Well, just like a way to reference the comic book in a way, but not take away from the story, but also totally reward you if you give a shit.
Yeah,
So they do an interrogation scene with the Powers duo.
that's great.
And Ellipses, or Ellie, it is Ellie. We always do this every episode, right?
Yep.
Okay. Says, "Oh, you're gonna do the Powers thing," and like talks it out with them as they do the shtick that they do, which like. Even if you were a Powers fan, you would be like, "Oh, they do this thing."
I honestly have read Powers, and I was never like, a trope of that is the quippy banter back and forth, just because you don't think about those things while you're enjoying like the original source material.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need someone else's commentary on that, who's a storyteller, to point out the devices they use to get a story across.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And the panel of it is a twofold panel, and you read it like interchangeably, so she inserts herself in it, and it kind of showed you how just well read Ellie is. Like her superpower is knowing comic books super well.
Right, yeah.
And she's super smart. She's such a great lead to follow. She really earns that like following. And it gets revealed in this is that she's so smart that she figures out like maybe they're not killing the writers, but they're killing the gods that control them in some ways, and or something like that. She basically kind of spins it to like question who's actually being killed and who it could be.
Yeah, right. The storyline is that we're after a murderer who's killing comic book writers.
Yeah.
She's saying their intention may not be to kill the writer. The intention is to stifle their creations. I think she's posing that we don't necessarily know what happens to Brian Michael Bendis's characters once Brian Michael Bendis is killed. This could be someone who suffers consequences within a Powers comic, like in issues they haven't gotten to yet. She asked this really interesting question that is like, so what issue are you guys from? Like, where did you hop out of the comic?
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you talking about? And the guy's like, oh, let's move this along, because he doesn't want like his secret out.
Yeah. And so they're like, oh, well, you're early.
And she's like, oh, so pretty early in the story. That's interesting. So, we could have a villain from later on in their storyline saying, I want to prevent my capture
Yeah.
later on.
In it gets revealed that we don't know who created Ellipsis.
Yes, which is kind of like a light bulb moment for her. You can tell that it's just like maybe never occurred to her that she's got a creator, because she's such like a fangirl
Right.
and not necessarily like a lead.
Which, I mean, this is where we get a little bit speculative. It seems as if it will be Donny Cates who created her, and it'll be like a Stephen King Dark Tower thing.
Sure.
Where he enters the story.
Yeah.
Or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
in like a comical kind of way, right? Like she
Yes.
just is the story. She's the meta story.
So I know that last issue we were speculating a lot that the crazy writer they keep referring to, who's supposed to like know everything, who's that writer? Is it Donny Cates? Is it someone else?
Yeah. Is it Todd McFarlane?
Is it Todd McFarlane? One of the things that is like a joke that's made a couple times in here is just like, God, all this guy does is people talking in rooms.
Yes.
More people talking in rooms.
What is that a reference to?
I don't know. I think that's something that when we figure out who the writer is, or maybe it's a clue as to who the writer is, that'll make more sense.
That they always put people talking in rooms.
And part of me was thinking Kevin Smith,
Yeah.
because, I mean, all his movies are just so dialogue heavy and often are just like people in one location for a long period of time.
Right.
And I'm sure there's several other writers who are just known for like beefy dialogue,
In rooms.
characters sitting in rooms and not leaving.
Yeah. So that's definitely a big clue of who that person is.
Right.
The other massaged comic book reward was we follow two different stories here. The other story that we follow is the other character, the dweeby PK kid, Prophet's kid.
I was like, what does PK stand for?
I think Preacher's kid.
Preacher's kid. Okay.
Or PK. In general, and like following his trail of like he has to go talk to his father as part of figuring out, like if you remember early on in Crossover, he's a tool of the FBI or the whatever to kind of figure out some of the crime involving comic book stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have his father in captivity, or held captive, I guess.
Yep.
And he has to talk to his father and do some like father dialogue, which is written really well. Fabulous. Like really, really great.
Yep.
One of the things that gets revealed is that one thing that made his dad so mad was he found a comic book under his bed, and that comic was Saga.
Yeah.
So it's like mentioned by name. We've had one Brian K. Vaughan reference before, I think, early on in a comic.
Maybe that he was missing or something.
Yeah. So now Brian K. Vaughan is brought into the story of like, what did this preacher do to the author of that, or figure out, or how to get involved, or is he a suspect?
He whether he's lying or not, he suggests that he knows the murderer
Yes.
and is kind of helping facilitate them finding important comic book creators or setting them on the trail of different writers to kill.
Right. And that so this person set them on the trail to kill Brian K. Vaughan.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there's the people watching behind the glass and the son, who we can assume are comic book fans, are both like, fuck, no.
No, my guy, my guy. He's a nice guy, though. I don't want Brian to die.
No. And the idea that
They should do a thing where it's like Rob Liefeld gets killed and everybody's like, yeah.
Oh my God. But the idea that there could be Saga characters involved in this and we haven't gotten to them yet,
Oh, so
do
good.
you think for a second Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan will be like, no, don't use our characters?
No.
I don't think so. So if those characters ever show up, that'll be really fun.
I would
those
love
are
it.
Huge cult favorite characters.
If one of those characters is the murderer. I would at this point prefer it to be a character rather than a person, like a real author.
Well, and the great thing that we know is that they're hopping out of the comic books at different times, right? So this could be a character from Saga that has died and they're back alive again in this book.
Or what
You know
if
what I mean?
What if it coincides with the re-release of Saga?
It could, maybe, who knows?
Probably not likely.
Is the Will the murderer?
I hope it's fat, overweight Will.
Yeah. Which version of the Will are we going to get? Speaking of, that just reminded me, talking about other comic books crossing over with crossover. Nothing ever happened with that Robert Kirkman, Ryan Otley, Youngbloods parody comic they did.
That I bought for $10.
Yeah, that they printed on newsprint and image, nobody had to order it.
It's also really hard to file in your comic book collection, which I've now found out. I thought that too, and I'm like, no way did they just throw that away.
Something's got to happen with that. But
maybe Kirkman is the crazy man talking?
Maybe Kirkman's the crazy man.
And then that's how they kind of bring it back or something. I don't know. It's definitely, I think it's going to come back.
Yeah.
It has to. Well, okay, if it doesn't, it still was fun at the time.
Well, and it's never necessarily completely acknowledged that it is a crossover thing. I think we all just assumed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
But
you're I'm pretty sure it's a crossover thing.
I mean, I think the only reason why I'd like that with the trail off, I think there's a tweet or something that was cutesy, oh, look at this. I remember, it's a video of being we found this comic book, and it was a bunch of shrugging, and it's obviously it's a crossover thing. It's not just a weird image thing. So I don't know. My third massage thing was Power's race to go find their creators dead, which was an interesting thing that happened. But they find Scott Snyder dead. And so Scott Snyder is just Flash, dead, in the comic, which is a really interesting, cool reference. I thought that was really fun.
It would be so fun to see yourself depicted and murdered in a comic like that.
Because maybe there has been a Scott Snyder character that I'm not aware of that appeared somewhere here. But it's
I think they talk about him as missing or something at some point again, too. Yeah. In one of the first 2 issues.
Yeah. But anyway, it was cool to see him dead. So.
They're talking about an underground Comic-Con at the time, and he's at that when he gets killed. And they also mention they're doing a screening of Zorro. And then someone on the other end of the phone is like, oh my God, these nerds. And the other person's like, yeah, I know.
Okay, they spent an inordinate amount of time about why the Comic-Con is centered around Zorro, or Zorro is a front for it. And I'm like, is this a clue of something? Because I do not get the Zorro reference. I know it's a bad movie, but
yeah, and I think too that they're just kind of making fun of the fact that you've got these old heads who love these old campy
bullshitty shit,
westerns and dumb hero movies that are have not aged well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the big reveal, which we can kind of just talk about.
Yeah, how Scott Snyder was killed in the comic. They found the murder weapon.
Yes.
It is a batarang.
Yes. So Batman has now entered.
Or acknowledged, at least. Who can get their hands on a batarang?
James Tynion?
What if James Tynion's the murderer?
Yeah. Right? I mean, I think
It
like
doesn't
that.
have to be a comic character.
Yeah, because then it's like they don't have to get any rights for using the batarang. I don't think,
Yeah.
and they could just reference the weapon, and then he's
It looks
murderer.
the head of it looks a little different.
Yeah, exactly.
So they can like get away with it or something.
Yeah,
But part of it makes me wonder: is it a Batman villain
sure. It could be a
who
Batman.
is like it's someone who came out of Gotham and had access to
Here-
these things?
And we've said this almost every episode. Crossover will reach peak zenith once it accomplishes having gotten rights to any of officially of the big two.
Yeah, right.
And we speculated they might be Grifter because there was
The Jim
some,
Lee
like-
connection with
yeah,
Image.
Yeah. But that like if that's achieved, and I think the way to achieve it, which might be part of Donnie's little plan, is to like have this book be so hyped that it would be bad pub.
It's just unavoidable at some point.
Well, it would be bad press for DC or Marvel to be like,
No.
if it got out, if there was an email, it was like, no. Like, it wouldn't age well.
Yeah, right.
Like, I think that would be a really great strategy. Just
Uh-huh.
have this book have so much hype that it would be, like, really dumb for them not to be like, yeah, you can borrow Killer Croc for an episode.
Yeah, right.
Or for an issue. Yeah.
I agree. It would be mind blowing. I don't think it's ever going to happen, and that's what would make it mind blowing.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's this edging of it almost happening. That's like makes it so weird of a double read. This book is fabulous without that like
Yeah.
little hint of it almost happening.
Yeah.
That I don't need it. I'm not even like a big two head. Like I don't need that to happen. It just would be cool. Like just like otherworldly to imagine that happening.
Well, my thing now is that I'm engaged enough by just the story at the most basic level that when I do remember that it's like, oh yeah, we're dealing with this like fourth wall breaking thing in comics, and that enters back into it, I'm like, oh my God, I really like this book. There's a whole other level of just fun stuff that's, again, we say this every episode, but again, is like just for real heads, and that's like so much fun.
It did teeter on almost getting too meta, which is tough for me to say because I love a good meta book. But it didn't get there. It kept itself, but it almost like spiraled in the.
Well, and I'm like, how easy is it for meta things to unravel and become out of control and convoluted and just a story beyond comprehending? And this has stayed relatively, easy to comprehend for something that is so heavy-handedly making a joke at itself and dealing with like the possibilities of crossing universes and poking into the real world.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
So I think that they kept it in check. It was funny and it was fun, and enjoyable all the way through.
So I guess what the sentiment I want to leave on is that I could see people having read the first arc of this and saying, this is kind of what it is, and I got what I want out of it, and I'm not going to continue reading it. This book is worth continuing to read.
Oh, 100%.
So if you missed the last couple issues, these books aren't really hard to find. You can go back and get the back issues. You can move to trade. I would keep reading it because it's fun.
It is really, really rewarding Image comic book fans.
Uh-huh.
Like if you have been a big Image head in
Right.
any way. So I think this is a must if you're an Image fan.
Yeah.
But if you want like a good, it's every bit as good as an issue 9.
Sure.
That I've read.
Yeah.
Before, like it's tough for me to be like, I've read a book up to issue 9, and that was way better at this point than this book.
Yeah.
Because it's like the art of the comic book form is mastered by Donny.
Yeah.
And it's really on full display here.
That's a good point. How many issue 9s are this exciting still?
Yeah, like where you're like maybe issue like 4 or something like that was a little bit slow or something like that, but it's like very few of these issues have been like below a B+.
Right.
So I'm on fire for this. Got a lot of energy for this book, as my dad would say.
I'm on fire.
Oh baby.
Hey, little comic, is your daddy home? Did he go and read you all alone? Mm-hmm.
I'm on fire. Oh,
Bye.
I'm on fire.
I said bye.